Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Doreen Briglia. I'm the Vice President of Events and Administration for the Rockland Business Association, and we're happy to see you all this morning. The Women's Leadership Council is sponsored by Safe Harbor Group and Sheldon Horowitz, who is our RBA Chair, and he's with us this morning. WLC, which is our Letters for the Women's Leadership Council, is co-chaired by Marion Rokeach from Fountain View, Robin Rosenberg from the Garner Arts Historic District, and our newest co-chair is Liz Beneskack from Keller Williams Realty. So today we're excited to present Healthy Leadership in Stressful Times, and I'm going to hand it over to Marion Rokeach to introduce our speaker. But I forgot, I need to have a couple of housekeeping things, which is that we're going to leave everybody muted except for the speakers. When Stephanie is speaking, you may want to put your device on speaker view, so this way you will just see her, which is a little bit better than seeing the whole group at once. And we'll take questions at the end. If you'd like, you can put your information in the chat, and you can also put your questions in the chat, and we'll monitor those. So Marion, you are not muted, so you can go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, Doreen. And welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see men, women, children, grandchildren being participants of today. When I reached out to Stephanie, she was more than willing to discuss today's topic, as Doreen said, healthy leadership in stressful times. Leading during a pandemic is sure to impact emotional and mental wellness. Today, we're going to learn how leaders can support their own health and that of their employees during this difficult and unprecedented time. So today's topic is so timely and how important it is to today's current challenges. I'd like to introduce Stephanie. She has been a human services professional for over 25 years, providing direct clinical services to individuals and families affected by mental health or substance use issues. She has spent her entire career in Rockland community, beginning her work as a child and adolescent clinician for the Mental Health Association. Since 1997, she served in a variety of administrative roles, advanced up through the corporation, becoming the president and CEO in 2012. She maintains a private practice and serves as a lecturer in several graduate programs and sits on a number of human services boards. She's also a proud mother of two amazing teenagers. So Stephanie, welcome. And we're so happy that you're here to tell us how we can all manage this stressful time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me this morning. I really appreciate the opportunity. MHA has been a proud member of RBA for many years, and I am very fortunate to be a part of the CEO Forum as well. So I am going to share my screen with you because I do have a PowerPoint presentation. And I promise you that it is not too cumbersome. It's only 11 slides altogether. And can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Doreen. So just a quick note, in case anybody's not familiar with MHA of Rockland, we are a private nonprofit organization. We've been in business since 1951. We proudly serve approximately 6,000 community members per year. We are an operating budget of 13 million, and I have approximately 200 staff that I'm blessed to work with on a daily basis. So certainly this was a timely topic given what we are all facing with the global pandemic. And I'm happy to share with you a little bit about wellness for yourselves as leaders, talk a little bit about how we can support our staff who we have the privilege of working with, and also how our wellness relates to our leadership styles. So what kind of impact has the pandemic really had on all of us? If we look at the data, we know that there has been a 50% report of a negative impact on Americans' mental health across the country. We know that there's been 1,000% increase in calls to the National Emergency Mental Health Line. We know that 20,000 more texts have been sent in to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration text line in the past 6 months than in that same period of 2019. And we also know that there's been a 65% increase in users of online therapy resources. So it certainly is proof that everyone has been impacted in some way or shape or form in terms of their emotional wellness and their mental health. The good news is that we are hopefully destigmatizing mental health and mental wellness as a result of this global experience. People will be able to have more honest and transparent conversations about how they're doing and how they're managing their stress. And obviously the goal for all of us, and especially for those of us who have been in the industry, is that we want there to be an equal level of comfort in talking about mental health as there is with physical health, and of course with accessing resources as well. So what's been our collective experience? So the reality is that our realities have really crumbled around us in a very short period of time. The routines that we relied on were really ripped away from us. We had to contend with safety issues, health issues, and financial concerns, which all are overwhelming, and especially when you put them in context with each other. Our new world really involves some common difficult themes like isolation and loneliness and worry and anxiety and increased work demands. And we've all experienced a collective grief. And I just want to take a moment to explain a little bit more about that. Many people only equate grief with death and loss, and that's not true. The experience of grief is much larger, much broader, much more all-encompassing, and it really can involve specific and difficult change as well. First of all, we've all lost the familiarity of our lives as we knew them, and in many cases, we took those lives for granted. We've lost intimacy in terms of being able to have physical contact with friends and colleagues and loved ones, including hugs and kisses and being with, grandchildren. We've lost specific experiences that we were looking forward to, like graduations and weddings and proms. We've lost our secure vision of the future because we no longer know exactly what that looks like. And that ambiguity can be incredibly uncomfortable for us. So the reality is although it may be on different levels for different people, we are all having that same collective experience of grief. So I wanted to equate the stressors that we're now experiencing with some common themes. And certainly we've all heard about burnout. And I also want to talk a little bit about trauma and secondary trauma, because the reality is that the more fragile we are, the more stressed out we are, the more vulnerable we are to both burnout and trauma. So burnout is something that can be experienced by anyone. And if you think of an image that might help you connect with the concept of burnout, I think of two. I think of a Roman candle or a firework, which obviously explodes. So it implies that burnout can happen all of a sudden and can be very dramatic. Or if you think about hosting a dinner party and having lovely candles on your dining room table that slowly melt throughout the course of the evening and then eventually extinguish themselves. That can be an experience of burnout that some of us have as well, that it's a cumulative effect that happens over time, and then all of a sudden we feel depleted and we feel unable to move forward. We know that burnout encompasses three primary components: workload, pressure, and chaos when you put all of them together. And of course, I want to say that burnout can be experienced on different levels. It's not an all or nothing. We can feel a bit burnt out, a bit tired, a bit unmotivated. Or of course, we can feel completely exhausted and unable to move forward with our work. So it's really important that we be looking at how vulnerable we are to burnout right now during these particularly stressful times. Then we talk about trauma, and when we speak about secondary trauma, there are certain professions that are much more vulnerable to experiencing secondary trauma. Many of them you would expect: social workers, therapists, nurses, doctors, first responders. Interestingly enough, though, the groups that have been added to the list of potential for secondary trauma are teachers and the media. And teachers in particular, because they are working with children who have been dramatically impacted by all the changes in the world and all of the traumatic experiences that they are now facing, like the potential for school shootings, like familial dynamics, like domestic violence and substance use. And so teachers tend to sort of take on that experience that their students are having, and that's why they are vulnerable to secondary trauma. So instead of the Roman candle or the dinner party candles, we look at it as a sponge. You know, imagine that people working in these professions are sort of the sponges for the wounds of the world. And I know that that's sort of dramatic imagery, but it really is true. You know, we are soaking in everybody else's experiences as we're watching and listening and sharing, and in some cases doing therapy with folks with trauma histories. So exposure to other people's trauma is really something then that we can absorb, and it can be a part of our own experiences, and it can be very emotionally impactful for us. So of course, because this is the RBA, we had to talk about the business impact of mental health. And so it's important that we look at all the different ways that mental health conditions can impact our businesses. You know, we certainly can see absenteeism among our staff. We can see staff having to go out on disability as a result of mental health concerns. Loss of jobs because people can't perform in the ways that are expected of them, and that of course results in unemployment claims. Compounded health issues. So for example, if I struggle with chronic diabetes, but then I also struggle with depression, depression impacts my eating habits and my sleeping habits, which can then exacerbate my diabetes. I'm not taking as good of care of myself. We continue to see access issues for mental health care. So people don't feel comfortable coming forward to their employer and saying that they need some support. Even if they do, being able to connect to an EAP program or to a therapist that accepts your insurance can be difficult. And as people are more stressed out, more people may need to come forward, and so the system can get a bit overwhelmed. And certainly HR departments can get overwhelmed with connecting people to resources. And of course, as you would expect, mental health conditions can create personal suffering, they can create substance use issues, and unfortunately can result in suicide as well. So as basic as it is, it's really important to remember that self-care is incredibly valuable when it comes to protecting ourselves from experiencing either mental health conditions as a result of stress or an exacerbation of mental health conditions that we may already have. And I always say that it's important to give ourselves permission to practice self-care. A lot of people don't prioritize it. We tend to be taking care of others and not necessarily ourselves, or we feel that it's selfish to do things that are important for us or good for our own wellness. So there are 7 basic components to a self-care routine, and many of them are self-explanatory, but particularly relevant during a pandemic when our personal and professional lives have become completely blended, when many of us are operating from our homes, you know, all the time for business and personal. And so being mindful of these self-care components is that much more important. So being on a regular sleeping schedule so that you go to bed at the same time each evening, wake up at the same time each morning. And again, good sleep habits mean decompressing before we actually go to sleep, turning off electronics and turning off screens within an hour or two before going to bed, and having that place where we sleep be specifically for sleep. So, you know, that it's suggested that we not use our laptops in bed, we not use our phones in bed, we not do other things, because we're training our brains then that this is a space for multitasking, not for sleep. And it's really important that we train ourselves that that is a specific place just for our sleep. Having a daily schedule that works for all, and that's the important component. You know, we tend to schedule ourselves and take care of our own needs, but when we're operating within our homes, especially right now within the context of family, you know, you have multiple adults, multiple children in a house, sometimes extended family members. People's schedules can conflict, overlap with each other, and there can be dynamic tensions that are created as a result of that. It's also really important that when there's multiple people living in a house, that we all have schedules that work for and with each other, where there's a sharing of responsibilities. I can't tell you how many parents I'm talking with who are feeling completely exhausted and burnt out because they're dealing with their work, they're dealing with their own personal challenges and wellness issues, they're trying to homeschool their kids. You know, they're also doing all the chores around the house, and it's completely overwhelming. And so sharing responsibilities and developing schedules is really good for everybody's wellness within the house, and it can prevent conflicts, and it can also reduce, you know, a building of resentment when we feel like we're carrying too much responsibility ourselves. Basic things like making sure you're staying hydrated and eating regular meals. I can't tell you how many times I've been on 8 hours of Zoom calls and then realized I didn't eat today. And, you know, that's a pretty common occurrence. You know, when you joked about Blur's Day, you know, days, hours, they're all blending together. And so really separating out parts of our day. Are we having breakfast? Are we having lunch? Are we having dinner? What are the parameters for when we're taking breaks? You know, exercise then becomes especially important, and it doesn't have to be really rigorous for an hour a day. It can be stretching, it can be yoga, it can be going outside in nature, you know, even just getting up and moving every single hour, particularly because all of us sit so long in meetings. Joyful activities. So a lot of times we don't think about what brings us joy, and we don't actively seek it out, and there's so many different ways to have joyful moments. Cooking, baking, gardening, spending a few moments outside in nature, painting, yoga, spending time with your grandkids, you know, aromatherapy candles, literally anything that gives you that little spark of joy, that little positive feeling, that little lift. It's really important to build those into our days. Meditation or mindfulness, which I'm sure everybody is aware is really good for us. It does not have to mean an hour of sitting cross-legged chanting Om. It can certainly be 5 minutes of deep breathing in a quiet space. We know that diaphragm breaths actually turn off our amygdala, that part of our brain that's in charge of the fight or flight response. So literally just 5 minutes of diaphragm breathing can significantly lower your stress levels and stop the release of cortisol in your body. And checking in on loved ones. And there's lots of different ways, obviously, to do that these days when we can't be in person. So telephone calls or texts or Snapchats or Zoom calls or FaceTime, because when we support others, we're actually supporting our own wellness. We're feeling connected, and that's really important for our spirits. So how do we translate self-care into resiliency to protect ourselves from stress and from the effects of stress? There are 5 basic ways we talk about building resiliency. First of all, deciding when, how, and which news you're going to consume. It is so easy to be barraged by information, and especially negative, stressful, overwhelming information all day, every day. We learned the real detriment of that, particularly during 9/11, when there were repeated images over and over and over again of the planes hitting the towers and the towers crumbling. We know that that had a devastating effect on people, and especially on children, because it was like it was happening over and over and over again. And that built up a cumulative stress response for many people. So setting healthy limits around how much news do you consume and what times of day do you do that, so that you're attending to it, but then you're taking a break from it. Again, doing something to spark joy and allowing yourself the time and the grace for simple enjoyment. Even things like, I'm gonna, cook a meal for my family, but a lot of times I rush through it, I'm multitasking, I'm also talking on the phone, I'm mindful of the fact that it has to be done at a certain time because then my kids have something they have to attend to. Something that could have brought me joy becomes a stressful chore. So really being present in the moment and allowing yourself to appreciate what it is that you're enjoying. Avoiding toxic productivity. This is a big one. Many of you have seen the hashtags quarantine life or living my best life, and you're seeing on Facebook and LinkedIn these amazing home improvement projects and artwork and gardening and things that people are now saying, I finally have the time to do it. Look at all these amazing things I've accomplished. Well, first of all, that may not be possible for a lot of us who may continue to work from home and actually have more hours and a greater workload. And yet we could then feel that we're somehow failing or we're not doing something right, because look what everybody else is doing. You know, they're cleaning their closets and they're building gardens and they're refurbishing their furniture, you know, and I'm just trying to keep my head above water. So also stopping yourself from drawing comparisons between your experience in your life and others, and especially not falling into the trap of what people portray on social media, knowing that people are always going to put their best life forward, but it might not be an accurate representation of where they're really at. Again, getting rest and sleep helps you to build resiliency and engaging in self-care. So specifically looking at leadership through a crisis, the coronavirus is unfolding over an arc of time with a very clear beginning, middle, and end, although it might not feel clear. Think of it as what was, what is, and what will be. There was a past of relative stability and predictability, and now we're experiencing chaos and disruption. And we have to focus on the vision that there will be a different state and that we will be a part of actually creating that new state. So when we focus on leadership, it's important that we look at the difference between leading and managing, and that we make a conscious choice to do one or the other. Leading involves guiding people to the best eventual outcome over that arc of time. It's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. Your focus needs to be on what's likely to come next and being proactive in readying to meet that next thing on the horizon. It's a way that we can vision for our futures and for the futures of our business and prepare ourselves. Managing, on the other hand, is really about addressing the urgent needs of the present in the work that we're doing currently. It's making immediate choices and allocating resources, and the pace tends to be pretty fast, and actions have to be very decisive. What typically happens during a crisis, however, is that crises are overmanaged, and underled. The best leaders tend to navigate rough waters deftly, saving lives, energizing organizations, and inspiring communities. So if you wonder why during times of crisis, people tend to overmanage and underlead, there's a few common leadership pitfalls that I just wanted to highlight today. So first of all, one is taking a narrow view. During a time of crisis, what's really common is for an evolutionary survival mechanism to kick in. And that survival mechanism is for our focus to become much narrower, to deal with the crisis at hand. And that's actually designed to be a self-protective mechanism. But the trap is then that we are only seeing what's immediately in front of us. We're not seeing the bigger picture, and we're not seeing further down the road. And so if we are only looking at what's in front of us, we're falling short in terms of our ability to really lead in a proactive way. And we call it meta leadership. You know, having a broad, holistic view of the challenges that we're facing and being able to create opportunity as a result of those challenges. Another leadership pitfall is getting seduced by managing. So there can be an adrenaline rush that comes along with handling a crisis. And many of us who are leaders really feel comfortable in an operational comfort zone. You know, we know what to do, we make quick decisions, we handle different aspects of our work. And it can really feel like we're having a tangible value in terms of our day-to-day presence and our role in our businesses. That, however, is not ideal. You know, what we really need to be doing is taking the longer view, not necessarily managing all the minutiae and managing just in the presence. It becomes a really important thing to be able to delegate responsibilities and to trust our teams, to empower other people and support and guide them in making the decisions that we know they're capable of making, and resisting that urge to take over. That's just something that, you know, is difficult to fight at times because we really want to exert control. That then leads to the third pitfall, which is over-centralizing your response. So during a time of crisis, we know that there's an increase in risk, there's an increase in ambiguity, so much feels uncertain and feels volatile. And so we attempt to manage all those uncomfortable feelings and dynamics by exerting control. We want to try to, reduce the stress that we're all feeling, and we feel that by putting more control in place, everything else will feel better, and our staff in particular, will feel supported. However, it quite often backfires. The more we try to control, the more we're micromanaging, the more we're limiting sort of an organic opportunity for staff to use their strengths and their skills to rise up and assist with moving our organizations forward during a difficult time. What we really want to do is to seek order, not to seek control. Not only is that good for the people that we work with because it empowers them to be a part of a cohesive team and see the vision and the mission moving forward, but it's good for us as leaders because then we're not trying to lead as well as trying to manage, as well as trying to exert control and being so overwhelmed by all the different details that we're attempting to attend to. One of the things that also becomes important there is making sure that our staff are very clear about the organizational values and the vision and the mission so that they can feel connected to it and a part of the forward progress. And finally, forgetting the human factor. It's understandable, especially in my not-for-profit world, that we are focused on financial sustainability. It's incredibly difficult to be financially viable these days as a not-for-profit. So I can get stuck in data and I can get stuck in budgets and I can be constantly looking at revenue and expenses and doing comparisons. And if I do that, then I'm losing sight of so many other important pieces of my organization and what we do and how we can be viable for the future. Recognizing that every single person contributes to your mission, being able to celebrate everyone's work, being able to shout out good jobs that are happening, infusing meaning and purpose into people's functions. So we, for example, among our staff, talk about the fact that the people in the accounting office are just as important as our therapists. Our drivers who bring clients into program are just as important as our psychiatrists. Everybody plays a part in who we are and what we do, and everybody deserves to feel equally connected and equally proud of that work. So envision leading and managing as two circles in a Venn diagram. At the moment the crisis strikes, the two circles overlap. But as the crisis unfolds over the arc of time, the two activities move apart. The two circles are never fully separate because the present and the future are interdependent. The most effective leaders in crises ensure that someone else is managing the present while focusing their attention on leading beyond the crisis toward a more promising future. How we do that depends on who we are, what our leadership style is, and how well we're feeling and how capable we are of leading in an effective way. We talk about in my organization that there are some key components to leadership: transparency, connectedness, having a vision, and using that vision to orchestrate plans and the implementations of plans moving forward. Being able to inspire our workforce and to clearly communicate with them how important they are, the job that they're doing, and that they are a part of a larger mission and a larger vision. I feel personally responsible for role modeling health and wellness because that gives my staff permission to also do the same for them. We can't take care of others until we take care of ourselves. Creating opportunities for wellness. So for example, we have a virtual lunchroom twice a week where staff can get together on Zoom calls, and just share what's going on in their personal lives, pictures of their kids or their grandkids or their dogs. We've had some celebrations, of the successes that we've had so that people can really feel that they're making a difference and they can get re-energized during a really stressful time. We are focused on communication so that people stay and feel connected to each other and to our mission. So we put out a weekly newsletter to staff every single Friday so that folks know what's happening in the agency. My executive team, my management team, and then my departments all meet on a weekly basis. And I try to join all of those meetings on a regular basis in order to be more visible and more present, and be able to answer questions. So it's natural that the stronger we feel, the more capable we feel, the clearer and healthier we feel, the more effective we can be in our leadership styles, and also then encourage our staff to do the same. And of course, I would say that it's important to create a safe environment where people can be honest about what they're thinking and feeling, and whether or not they might benefit from accessing resources. If we don't normalize the conversation, then we're just perpetuating the stigma. And the circumstances right now are too stressful, and the potential consequences of not addressing mental health are too grave to keep it quiet. And so I so appreciate this opportunity in particular, because I think it helps again to normalize that mental health is just as important as physical health, that it's okay to have it as a conversation, and that it's okay to prioritize it, that we're not just talking about mental illness, but we're talking about mental wellness. So that is it for my formal presentation, and I am more than happy to answer questions or engage in any kind of dialogue that you would like.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was terrific.
Oh, my pleasure.
Great presentation.
I wondered if you thought because I was a social worker, I was going to make you do yoga or deep breathing, and it was going to get really hokey. So hopefully you were pleasantly surprised that it was not too hokey.
No, that was fantastic. We're going to open it up to some questions. So I've made it possible so that you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question. So anybody?
Hey, Barry, are you raising your hand?
I am, like a good.
Well, I'm going to call on you then, Barry.
Brought you an apple, teacher. But listen,
Thank you.
wait, will you send out that PowerPoint? So that
Absolutely, I'm happy to do that. And I will absolutely give credit to the 4 leadership pitfalls that I cited in the presentation. Harvard has an amazing leadership initiative, and that was information that I garnered from them. So I will, I'd be happy to share the presentation with Doreen, I guess, and then maybe you have a discussion list for everybody.
right.
Yeah, that would be terrific. We've also recorded this session, so we have not published those before, but maybe if you're okay with that, we might want to put that on our Facebook page.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Hi, Heather.
Hi, how are you? Thanks
Hey,
for
how are
your
you?
presentation.
Thank you.
So we've been promoting quite a bit that getting out in nature and getting into the parks is not only helpful physically for physical health, but mental health. But, I guess the flip side of that is that everybody's on high stress, and people wearing masks, people not wearing masks. And I guess I just wondered if you could comment on that and any thoughts you have about specific kind of getting out into nature and how that helps, but especially in the current environment where it's a little heightened stress around getting out into the environment.
Absolutely. So of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention there's political complications and implications about mask wearing and not wearing masks, wearing masks. So that's a piece also of what is stressing people out. So I'm just going to set that off to the side, but say that that's important. I would advise that, you check in with yourself based on what your own comfort levels are. Some people feel perfectly fine, going to a park, say, a state park that has a paved walkway around a lake, and social distancing, with a mask. And if that's comfortable for folks, then by all means, indulge yourself and do that. If you want company while you do that, because that feels more comfortable, again, use the safety precautions as put out by the CDC and go right ahead. There are people, though, who feel more stressed out by going into a public place, but they still want to get out in nature. So what might that look like? Do they have a backyard? Do they have a neighborhood that they could walk around? It's really about individual comfort levels and how we kind of nurture ourselves and our wellness, and as hokey as it sounds, kind of feed our souls and feed our spirit. So I know, people that have been pitching tents in their backyards and camping with their kids, and looking up at the stars every night. They don't want to go to parks and interact with other people, or they're afraid to to be on jungle gyms or have their kids be on jungle gyms. So there's no right or wrong. It's very much an individual experience. And as long as we're checking in with ourselves and making good decisions, then I would say, of course, there's going to be the therapeutic benefit of being outside and being in nature and really just trying to be present and take it in. Esther, hi.
Yes, hi. I'm sorry, I may have missed a portion about people living alone, the sense of isolation, because I was called out of my office for a minute. And maybe you addressed that about how particularly hard it is for people living alone, especially the elderly. And I live in a complex with a lot of older people, you know, a number of them 90 plus. And so I've been checking on them at least once or twice a week and doing some food shopping for a few of them. And I've really been very concerned, you know, and sometimes they are, I guess, protective or defensive when I say, you know, there are other organizations, maybe that, you know, you can make a phone call. I was thinking about Mental Health Association. I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm hoping that MHA has gotten calls from elderly people. I hope that people are reaching out and talking and getting some support. I get the sense that they really isolate, that they're too proud to ask for any kind of help.
So you bring up such an important point, Esther, and I didn't focus specifically on the isolation or the loneliness factor, but you're so right that especially for the folks who are living alone, that this pandemic can have even more devastating consequences for them because they feel trapped, they feel disconnected.
Yes.
There's, you know, fears about, well, what if I get sick and nobody even knows that I'm sick? You know, and your brain, of course, can go to that place of worst case scenario. And so staying connected through technology has become more important than ever these days, since we don't always have the luxury of, you know, face-to-face interaction, you know, checking in on loved ones and on neighbors. You know, what we've been doing a lot with our clients who live alone is, you know, curbside drop-offs, you know, of supplies that they might need or they might benefit from, or, you know, doing a wave by at the front door so that somebody has something to look forward to and you can see, you know, that they're okay and you know, they're engaging with you in a way that's safe. And you indicated, you know, that folks can reach out for support. So MHA of Rockland has a warm line, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, that we've been operating since the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, there's many local, state, and national resources. And you don't have to be in a mental health crisis in order to reach out. You know, you can simply reach out through text or through a phone call, you know, just to talk, just to connect, just to have a conversation with somebody so that you don't battle that isolation and that loneliness. And I'll also just mention, you could live among 5 people and still feel lonely. You know, there's a piece of it that's about emotional connectedness. And so, you know, it's important to look at it from that perspective too, that it's not just the physical act of being alone, but it's about, you know, not feeling connected to others from an emotional perspective.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Nope. I don't see any hands raised.
Well, actually, related to what we were just discussing, I'm guessing that the Rockland County Office of Aging, RSVP, other senior groups, Meals on Wheels, I'm guessing that they all know about MHA's hotline, about the services that your organization are providing, and, you know, that they serve as a resource in referring you to people who may need some help, people who are isolated, especially the elderly. You know, I'm always thinking about how to connect them and inform them. I worry about them a lot. And as I said, some of them get a little defensive.
Yeah.
I'm fine, don't worry about me.
Yeah.
But I sense that they're not, that some have been so fearful of leaving their apartments. And I know 2 people who are afraid to go out on their balcony. They're not even getting fresh air. It's really upsetting.
Yeah, and I hear how much you care, Esther, and I so respect and admire and appreciate that. And yes, we have tried to publicize that warm line number as much as possible and work in partnership with the county to disseminate it. But it is something that we need to keep doing. You know, sometimes you get barraged with information and then you forget, you know, what resources are available, or you misplace a number, or you think, oh, because we're 3 months in, you know, we don't need it as much. So continuing to make that, you know, visible as a resource is an important priority.
I
Thanks.
have a question.
Sure. Hi,
Hi, Linda. Thanks to Barry, I was able to join today, and this was very wonderful to hear. I feel like a lot of it applies to me personally, so thank you. My question is, it's such a taboo subject, right, in the workplace. How do you, you know, and I'm head of HR, controller. I try to bring in the mental health discussion, but any advice? Like, I sent a great article that I found from the Harvard Business Review like 2 months ago. What you're feeling is grief. I should share it with you. It's like the 6th stage of grief. It was really good, and not one response. And I promoted our EAP and told people, you know, our health insurance has, you know, network mental health providers. Like, it's a very taboo subject in the workplace. Any advice on how I could more promote it?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for your kind and positive feedback. It was appreciated. So you bring up what we have been struggling with for decades, which is the stigma that's still attached to mental health and mental illness. And so we continue to battle that. You know, I think that we create a culture, and sometimes it takes a little while to have a culture shift where we can have these conversations and not have them be behind closed doors and only with, you know, the HR director. I know for us, people think, oh, you know, I'm in crisis and that's the only time that I'm going to go connect to HR, you know, and then it has to stay a secret. So we are constantly talking about mental wellness and emotional wellness and promoting proactive strategies for how to take care of ourselves. And that then leads to conversations about, well, what's your stress level and how you doing? And are you feeling a little bit more sad or a little bit more disconnected? So that if you start on the continuum of wellness and how to take care of yourself, then it's a little bit easier to acknowledge why that's harder right now. And then you can sort of help people embrace and talk about, well, what they're feeling and what they're thinking, as opposed to jumping right to, I have depression or I have anxiety and I need help for it. You know, we also, the Mental Health Association comes out and does like lunch and learns or workplace wellness seminars, you know, again, just to kind of try to normalize the conversation and not have it be, you know, mental illness and here's what that looks like, but how do we all take care of ourselves during difficult times? And so I'd be happy to partner with you, Linda, and also connect you, you know, with my HR staff for how we've tried to create a culture where it's not only safe, but it's expected that we're all going to be honest about how we're doing.
Because everyone knows a healthier employee is a more productive employee. They benefit and the company benefits. It's like a win-win. But
absolutely. We were blessed to win the business award, or not-for-profit award, through the REDC and also the RBA Pinnacle Award a few years ago. And what was remarkable is in doing research about how many billions of dollars mental health conditions cost companies and countries every year, right? So that there is a very concrete consequence of people not being well. And so this isn't, you know, a frou-frou social worky, you know, warm and fuzzy conversation. It has a dramatic financial impact on our businesses and on our communities. And that's why I love these opportunities to talk with business leaders, you know, to reinforce the importance of these conversations. So thank you.
I see that Liz Beneskack has her hand raised. So Liz, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks. Stephanie, I really appreciate your talk today and the things that you shared with us. You know, it resonated a lot with me, and being in real estate, my whole business is being out in the public and going and doing and what have you. And at the beginning of this pandemic, I didn't realize how you know, everything that you said resonated, right? Like, you know, we all have all these people in our house and we can't leave and we were all stuck there. I was very grateful that my children are older so that I, you know, I wasn't doing the homeschooling because nobody would have learned a thing. But anyway, so I think the thing for that I'm taking away from this is that, you know, yes, you can't, the notes that I made, the fake booking, right? Looking at what everybody else is doing and how their life is so wonderful. Yeah, it kind of sucks too. Everybody's got an issue and, you know, and shutting off the news and knowing when to. I mean, it's been a very, very scary time. In addition to the pandemic, we have all these riots and, you know, people are frustrated and scared and it's crazy and all of that. So all of this stuff is really, you know, so timely. And I think that it's fantastic. I think that the question that I have for you is, what do we do within not only our workplace, but, you know, in life in general, to try to further the conversation of acceptance about mental health issues, right? Because in my mind, there's no difference between diabetes or cancer or, you know, lupus and an anxiety disorder or a depression or bipolar or whatever. This is a medical condition. So what do we do? How do we kind of bring people into, you know, that piece of it to kind of get some acceptance with that?
So first of all, thank you for the positive feedback. It's appreciated. And I couldn't agree with you more about the continuing stigma. People have no problem saying, I have the flu and I'm going to the doctor. I broke my arm and I'm going to the emergency room. People have a real issue with saying, I'm struggling with depression or I'm struggling with anxiety and I'm going to see a psychiatrist or a therapist. So, you know, obviously this is what we've been struggling with as an industry for decades, and there's no one magic solution. I do think that, first of all, putting a face to these experiences has become enormously important. So the more professional athletes that step forward and say, yeah, I struggle with panic attacks, or yeah, I went through depression, the more, you know, music stars or actors come forward and say, absolutely, this happens to me. Because again, we need to normalize it. If 1 in 5 Americans is going to struggle with a mental health condition throughout their lives, we're all touched by it in some way, shape, or form, right? Ourselves, within our families, or within our neighbors, or within our workplaces. There's no way that you're going to get through this life without being impacted in some way by mental health. So I do think that that is one of the ways that we fight the stigma, is to talk about that this is everybody and anybody across all socioeconomic classes, across all ethnic backgrounds, that there's no way to completely protect yourself from having some mental health challenges. And so it's better then to talk about it and feel connected to one another and feel that it's okay to have these conversations. And so even though, you know, it's terrible that we're having this pandemic and all the implications of it and all the lives lost, the one thing that we are all grateful for in my industry is that this is giving us an opportunity to talk about mental health in a way that's so much broader, so much less stigmatizing. And literally, it's not just, you know, our community or our state or our country, it's the world. And it's not a coincidence that we're talking about collective grief, because that's more comfortable for people than talking about collective mental health challenges. Right? Even that is a bit of a continuum. People are more comfortable saying I'm grieving than saying I'm experiencing a mental health challenge. So I think language is really important. I think looking at who's coming forward and having the conversations and revealing it. And then I think being invested in creating a culture where it's safe to have the conversation and to keep.
Right. You know, one of the things that you pointed out in the beginning was talking about self-care and how, you know, if you're not okay, if you have nothing to give, there's nothing, you can't take care of other people.
Yep.
So it's almost like with baby steps, you know, you can't make a cake unless you know the recipe and you have the right ingredients. So when you're looking at the situation of how do you, if you have a friend that's struggling, or you have an employee or a coworker, or even, you know, the person level up from you, right? it's starting that conversation and how are you doing? It's, you know, we made in my industry, because it would be really crass to pick up the phone and smile and dial and talk about, hi, where do you want to move? You know, you can't do that in the middle of this whole thing. And what we did a lot of were literally just care calls. How are you? What's going on? What are you doing? And what came out of those, just the simple question is, sometimes you laughed, sometimes you cried, sometimes I went grocery shopping for a client's mother that she couldn't get to. Like, you know, the things that you do. And it's sometimes, like you said, not only is it good for you, but it's good for them, but it's good for you too. You're feeding yourself. So anyway, I thank you very much.
Of course. So I want to piggyback on two things. First of all, I loved what you said about you can't take care of others until you take care of yourself. The analogy we use in our parenting groups is the oxygen mask. When that oxygen mask comes down from the airplane ceiling, you have to put it on yourself first and then put the masks on the people around you that you love. Because if you can't do that, then you're going to struggle and you can't help anybody else. We also teach mental health first aid, which is an evidence-based curriculum that's being used across the globe. And essentially, many of us are trained in CPR. We are much more likely to come face to face with someone having a mental health crisis than a physical health crisis. And yet we're not trained, right? And again, it's those other people that are trained to help somebody with a mental health issue. So mental health first aid talks about what you feel, what you experience if you might be having depression or anxiety, or you might actually be having suicidal thoughts. And it creates language and it creates a way for you to just have dialogues, you know, with your loved ones, with your coworkers, with your neighbors, you don't have to be a mental health professional to talk to somebody who might be experiencing a mental health challenge. So mental health first aid is amazing. You know, it can be 2 half days or it can be a 1 full day workshop. And we've been able to conduct those workshops throughout the Rockland community, but we're happy to do it, you know, for corporations as well. So please keep that in mind.
I'm wondering if Sheldon, do you have anything that you'd like to add this morning?
I just want to add, Stephanie, what an incredible presentation.
Well, thank you.
So thank you. And as the RBA chair, just another incredible session of this forum. You know, I'm so proud of everyone who's here, everyone who registered. Very proud of just how we just continued through this situation, and all the subgroups, I think actually except one, have met not once, but in some cases 2 or 3 times, if not 4. You know, to Doreen and Roger, Melissa, and everyone else, you guys never skipped a beat. So thank you so much to everyone in this room, as I would say. And maybe, God willing, come September, we could have in-person, socially distant or socially correct and mask correct in-person meetings, because that also is wonderful. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk as chair.
Oh, thanks, Sheldon. And Robin, I know that you had yourself unmuted earlier. Did you want to say something?
Liz touched on it, but it had to do with the group dynamics, what we're seeing going on in the world right now. When people are acting out, both individually, we hear about people jumping from the bridges and lots of shootings, and then all of the group protests that have turned into something much more violent. And hearing that all the time is troubling. And I was thinking about, how do we digest that, and then how do we move on from that, because it's happening everywhere. It's even gotten to the point where in my business, I'm thinking about, if I take this action, like let's say with a tenant, if I take an action with a tenant, what are the repercussions of that? I never would have thought about that before, but I feel like everyone is so unbalanced that I now worrying, okay, if I do X, what is that person going to do in retaliation in my business? So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Stephanie, but I also do want to say this was a fantastic presentation, and thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. So I do want to capitalize on two things that you said. I think one of the things that unfortunately contributes to and perpetuates the stigma of mental health is the misnomer that people with mental illness are more likely to be violent. And every time we have a tragedy in this country, the first assumption and the first focus is, oh, he must be mentally ill and that's why he did what he did. The reality is people with mental illness are more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators of violence. But that's not what you would know if you just look at the media. So that's an important piece, you know, to understand. And I think that that stigma, again, stops people from getting the help that they need. It's, you're also highlighting exposure to trauma, and when you're barraged by violence, you know, on the news or personal stories of it, it kind of seeps in and it makes you feel more fragile, and then it can lead to a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of fear or hypervigilance. You know, when we are hypersensitive and hypervigilant, we constantly have cortisol running through our bodies, which depletes us and stresses us out. And so self-care becomes so important to stop that release of cortisol and be able to take a breath and decompress. So I think limiting, you know, again, media exposure, and then giving yourself permission to trust your gut. You know, I say to people that if you have a sense that something is going to go in a bad direction, give yourself permission to do whatever you need to do to stay and feel and be safe. You know, and even if that means you're not following through on something that maybe you were supposed to do for the day, but you have a good reason and you have an explanation, and that can be shared with somebody. It's when we push ourselves through situations that don't feel right that sometimes we're inadvertently increasing the risk. And of course, you know, it's a larger conversation about people acting out, you know, or potentially having their experiences turn into violent acts or violent behavior. I think there's obviously a lot of dynamics right now in the United States that are fueling that violence. But I hear you, and I think it's important to acknowledge that that can affect all of us in terms of our fear, in terms of our hypervigilance, and also just feeling less safe in the world. And there's no easy answers to any of that. But again, surrounding ourselves with a support network where we feel safe and connected, and giving ourselves permission to practice self-care so that we're not stressed out all the time and are better able to cope with stress and feel more resilient, you know, becomes incredibly important for the long haul.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Marion, okay, go ahead, Marion.
I just want to address something that was so important to Esther and her talking about the older adults, since that's my business. I think that connectivity and communication are two of the biggest things. If you have a neighbor who you know isn't getting out of the house, call them up, say hi, knock on the door, be outside with a mask, but communicate with them. And, you know, we have a no visitor policy in our retirement community, but the people can visit outside with their families, but still the isolation, not seeing other people has been very difficult. And so communication is just such a big part. And Stephanie, thank you so much. It's been very helpful to, I think, everybody who's on this Zoom to hear, you know, parts of things that affect them. So thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to share the presentation with Doreen, and she can send it out to everybody who would like to have it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everything. It was really a very, very good presentation. I think we can all relate to it. So everybody go out and take care of yourselves and de-stress.
Right.
And I just want to invite you all to next week. We have What's Up Wednesday. It's our free networking at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, July 1st. And we split up into breakout rooms. So you get to talk a lot about your business and how you're doing. So be sure to get our invite and sign up. And we hope to see you there. And thank you so much again, Stephanie.
My pleasure. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Stephanie. It was fantastic.
You will.
Yes.
Feel free to reach out to me, calls, emails, whatever. We're happy to be helpful in any way we can.
Something I'd like to add,
Okay.
forwarding your presentation, I think will be really valuable. I'm going to forward it to our chief medical director here at the ARC Rockland, because there may be some information there of value, and to benefit so many individuals and so many organizations.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Bye.
Have a great
Bye.
day.